Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. Tonight, we continue our series, Earth to New York, which looks at life in other countries and at the New York communities from those countries. This week, Trinidad and Tobago were in the news, unfortunately for this reason, the alleged JFK terror plot. But we'll get to know much more about the local Trinidadian community than that. Also tonight, is immigration bad for African Americans? But first, here are this week's online video picks. Video pick number 1. Former House Speaker and possible presidential candidate Newt Gingrich has posted a challenge on YouTube to use online video for substantive discussion of the issues, not just snarky attacks. Here's one of the entries, done in the style of that ever-present Macintosh commercial.
Hi, I'm a conservative.
And I'm a liberal.
Hey, I'm a little confused about your position on taxes. Help me understand.
Sure, I'm all about opening people's minds.
Well, good. I'm not a big fan of taxes, but I can see where they'd be useful to you.
Oh, me too.
For example, if you want people to drive less, then put a tax on gas.
Right?
If you want people to smoke less, put a tax on cigarettes.
Exactly. Give yourself some credit. I think you understand taxes a lot better than you thought.
Well, thanks, but here's what I don't understand. Let's say all those things are true, then why do we put a tax on income?
Well, income tax, that's different. I mean, we want people to earn income enough to
keep the government going.
Exactly.
Well, then I guess I do understand taxes.
So which was that, substantive discussion or a snarky attack? We curate, you decide. Video pick number 2. Hillary Clinton also has a web video contest as she runs for president. She's using online video to ask Americans to suggest a campaign theme song.
Last week, I asked you, the American people, to help us choose our campaign song. And I'm happy to say that you have spoken, or sung, as the case may be. Anyway, there were some truly wonderful selections.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hillary Clinton is our candidate. I'm bringing sexy back. Through the window.
Those weren't them.
There's no such thing as a rock prodigy.
Those either.
Be all that you can.
Okay, this is more like it.
High above the mountains, far across the sea, I can hear.
Oh, anyway, I'm so gratified that all of you thought this was such a wonderful idea.
This is ridiculous.
Insulting.
Stupid.
disappointing. Are you freaking kidding me?
So keep voting at hillaryclinton.com and send in your suggestions for the final round. And in the coming days, we'll announce the winner. Thank you all for your help. Well, most of you.
Now, this may work for Senator Clinton as long as she doesn't sing herself. Did you see the video of Hillary singing the national anthem that we aired a few weeks ago? Even Paula Abdul would have ripped it. Video pick number 3. The substance of this is more than 40 years old, but it just came to public light. President Lyndon Johnson, who committed America to the Vietnam War and never backed down, confiding at the very beginning that it all could be pointless. Now, this is from Bill Moyers on pbs.org and YouTube.
I'll tell you, the more I just stayed awake last night thinking about this thing, the more I think of it, I don't know what in the hell. It looks like me we're getting into another Korea. It just worries the hell out of me. I don't see what we can ever hope to get out of there with once we're committed. I believe the Chinese communists coming into it. I don't think that we can fight them 10,000 miles away from home and ever get anywhere in that area. I don't think it's worth fighting for, and I don't think we can get out. And it's just the biggest damn mess.
It is. It's an awful mess.
And we just got to think about. I look at this sergeant of mine this morning. Got 6 little old kids over there, and he is getting out my things and bringing me in my night reading and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought about ordering those kids in there. And what in the hell am I ordering him out there for? It's damned easy to get in war, but it's going to be awfully hard to ever extricate yourself if you get in.
President Johnson talking to one of his top advisors at the time, 1964. Now, maybe someday we'll find out that President Bush was similarly troubled about getting into Iraq. Then again, maybe not. Video pick number 4. This is a video of a public art piece from Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. The video maker, who posts on YouTube as Donnie Miller, says it lasted on the street for 3 full days. Well, maybe that's an art stunt in La La Land, but isn't that exactly what we have in New York in real life? Shopping for the rich and 99-cent stores? And video pick number 5, you're not likely to see this kind of government announcement in the United States anytime soon, but this is airing in England and Ireland, encouraging a certain way to get around town.
Remember when we held hands, Red Rover and marching band? You had a tan, staying outside that long's gonna make you man. Never going back again. I don't wanna say it's breaking my heart, I don't know where to start. Old plans are falling apart.
And that's our online video picks for this week. Now we continue with our series, Earth to New York, which looks at life in other countries and at the New York communities from those countries. This week, Trinidad and Tobago to New York. This Caribbean republic, made up of Trinidad, Tobago, and about 20 smaller islands, is in the news because of the alleged JFK terror plot. The 4th suspect in the case was arrested in Trinidad yesterday, and a Trinidadian Islamist group was allegedly approached for help and refused. It is 351 miles from Port of Spain, the capital, to Georgetown, the capital of Guyana. Most of the alleged plotters were Guyanese or Guyanese New Yorkers. It's 2,207 miles from Port of Spain to JFK Airport, according to timeanddate.com. More about Trinidad and Tobago now, and Guyana too. Many Americans were surprised by the connections to those nations and the alleged JFK terror plot as we zoom in on the airport thanks to Google Earth. In fact, the suspects allegedly used Google Earth to pinpoint the few lines said to be their airport targets. So let's find out more now as we continue our series, Earth to New York. With me now, Harza Joanne Ali, a Trinidadian community leader and activist here in New York, and James Briggs Murray, founding curator of the Moving Image and Recorded Sound Division at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. Welcome to the program. Thank you very much for coming in. Hazra, let's begin with Trinidad and Tobago 101 for the completely unfamiliar. Why is it Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, we're a twin island republic. I suppose Tobago is too small to succeed and survive on their own since they have no industry. And Trinidad, of course, being the main island, and our industry, is methanol, oil, natural gas, pretty much
And that's where the vast majority of the population lives, is on the island of Trinidad,
yes.
correct?
Exactly.
And Jim, there are actually like 21 other islands?
Well, but nobody thinks about those unless you happen to own one of them, I suppose. But just to add some historical perspective, the real reason for the Twin Island Republic is because traditionally during the time of colonial authority by the British, it was administratively more efficient to govern the two islands from one location rather than to have two separate governors. And so that continued through the period of independence and so on.
Hazra, you have the Trinidadian flag here, right? You want to show it?
We have a little toy flag. That's what we use when we celebrate.
And do the colors mean something in particular? Does the pattern mean anything in particular?
Well, I'm sure like most flags do, they do have some significance. Perhaps James can tell you what they mean.
I don't remember all of the significance, obviously.
That's right. Well, Trinidad and Tobago, in the colonial era, changed hands a number of times, right?
Yes.
And that has left it extremely diverse, hasn't it?
Well, the primary diversity, of course, is Africans and Indians from India.
And you're of African Trinidadian descent, and you're of Indian Trinidadian descent?
Exactly.
And you're an immigrant, actually, right?
Well, there's a little history of that, and especially when slavery ended, the British needed workers to substitute the African slaves who were no longer accepting the low wages that they were offering. And so they brought Indians to Trinidad. And during the period of 1845 and 1917, more than 148,000 Indians were brought to Trinidad. And similarly, Guyana, twice as many were brought to Guyana, which has resulted today in 1.5 million Indians living in in 3 countries in the Caribbean. Although Guyana is not Caribbean, it's South America, and it's in the news, as we just mentioned, because of the arrests. But they too have a big population of Indians.
But it beaches the Caribbean, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and because of the British connection, we stayed connected.
Yeah, it's the one English-speaking country in South America.
Right.
But also, as Hazra was saying, you had a period of enslavement that lasted for a few centuries, and Africans, once they were able to liberate themselves, refused to do that same labor at the wages that were being offered.
24 cents. Yeah. 24 cents a day.
Isn't this the debate we're having in this country right now over immigration? In fact, it's our next segment on the show. Will African Americans who are unemployed do the work that illegal immigrants do if the illegal immigrants get deported?
Well, I always think that nothing is quite analogous with enslavement.
Fair enough. Do the two groups get along there?
In general, I would say yes. I mean, there's going to be racism in any time I think that you put people of other cultures together, there will be some segments of the population that will have difficulty. But in general, in Trinidad, one thing that's happened has been a lot of intermarriage. There was a famous calypso in the 1950s by a chap who called himself Douglas. And Douglas, by definition, is a person who was of both African and Indian descent, generally with one of either kind of parent. And he said, if you send something to the effect that if you send the Indian to India and the African to Africa, someone please tell me where's the land for me. I'm neither one nor the other. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You know, so the point of the matter is that there's so much intermarriage and so much that you actually have a wide variety of looking people. You have people who are of various mixtures, and so you don't have just pure Africans and pure Indians. You do have those, but you have quite a large population of those in between.
And you should see the phone number on your screen. Trinidadians, Tobagonians, anybody from the islands, you generally referred to as Trinis in general.
Yes.
Although, let's see, I also saw a word. I wrote it down because I hadn't seen it.
Trinbagonians.
That's it, Trinbagonians. Do people actually say that?
I say it.
You say it to include everyone, but I think there are more Trinis in New York than Tobagonians. So you use it, but it's not often that you find people that are from Tobago. It's a small island.
Trinis, Tobagonians, Trinbagonians, if you're out there tonight, call us up and talk about being from there, talk about the community in New York, talk about your reactions to this case being in the news, whatever you want. 212-251-0801, 212-251-0801. You should see the number on your screen. So another kind of diversity is religious diversity, because probably a lot of New Yorkers seeing the story are surprised to find out that there's a Muslim community there.
Well, going back to what I explained to you about the Indians being taken there, with the Indians came Islam, because Indians were taken there, remember I said, from 1845 to 1917. India and Pakistan were still one country.
Yes.
And therefore the people moving could have been of any of the three religions that existed in India at the time.
Hindu.
So Hindu, Muslim, and Christians. So the Christians were in much smaller numbers, but there were a significant amount. I think that the population today, of the half of the population that is specifically Indians, perhaps only 25% of those are Muslims. But they are Sunni Muslims. And that's, I think, I mean, for us growing up in the Caribbean, there was no distinction. A Muslim was just a Muslim. There was no distinction, because Sunni and Shiite is such a Middle Eastern term, and it really didn't play any role.
Right.
But in the 60s, and I think perhaps you could jump in and help me with this, when the movement of Malcolm X and people like that started with their Islamic movement. Well, he didn't start one, but I think that's when a different kind of Islam started in Trinidad.
What we generally call black Muslims.
Yes,
well,
that's
they were
what
called
started.
black Muslims by the media, not by anybody who was in the Nation of Islam.
Right.
I was in New York at the time when Malcolm was here as a teenager, and I never heard any of the people in the Nation of Islam calling themselves black Muslims. They call themselves Muslims, and they referred to their organization as the Nation of Islam. The term black Muslim is a media term. But the point is that once Malcolm split with the Nation of Islam, many of the people of African descent in this country who continued to follow Islam but no longer followed the Honorable Elijah Muhammad actually referred to themselves as Sunni Muslims, because there was little awareness of Shiite Islam at that time. Right. They referred to themselves as Sunni Muslims to distinguish themselves from Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam.
And what about radical Islamists? That's, again, coming as a surprise to a lot of people. I know there was a history of a coup attempt in the early 90s. How much of a presence, who is this group, Jamaat al-Muslimin, I'm sorry.
I don't want to really talk about the group because I don't know much about the group. I do know that a very good relative of mine, who happened to be prime minister at the time, had a gun put to his head and was told to call off the army, and he said attack with full force. And he was, instead of being shot in his head, they shot him in his leg. He's still alive. He went on to become the president of the country. That's A.N.R. Robinson, who was a relative of mine. Even the notion of talking about that group without some evidence yet of their involvement in this alleged plan. Well, there was a plan. I don't think the plan was alleged. I think there really was a plan, but I don't know what the relationship
Well, the only alleged involvement of the group, excuse me, is that they were approached and refused to get involved.
Which does not mean that they were involved. It means
Correct.
they were approached.
Right, but nevertheless, there's some kind of radical Muslim group on the island.
Yes, without a doubt, and they did, everyone knows the history of it. Well, everyone doesn't know the history of it. They did attempt a coup without the wherewithal to carry out the running of the country. Had they been successful, they did kill a few people, and they did get off because there was an amnesty deal. And even though the government wanted to rescind that deal, there's no the highest court in Trinidad actually is the Privy Court, the Privy Council, which is the British with their wigs and so on, who came in and said, well, you must honor the amnesty. So by the time I went down after that coup, 7 months later or so, for Carnival, people were singing, Abu Bakr, take over. Abu Bakr was the chap who was the head of that group. Right. So people were dancing in the streets to music that was composed, because that's the way Trinidad is. When something passes, as this will pass, they'll be singing about it. It's over.
And I'm surprised that that group was allowed to exist as a political organization after doing that.
They're not a political organization. They are supposedly a religious organization, and they're always in trouble with the law. The leader goes in and out of jail. And it reminds me of a quote from Sadat, Anwar Sadat of Egypt, who said the only thing decent about the British was their court system. So it kept him alive, and therefore one day he went on to be the president of Egypt. Well, I think it's the same in Trinidad, because the leader is often, I would see it on the internet, he's in jail for allegedly murdering somebody, and then a couple of weeks later he's out because he was able to figure out something with the legal system, or they, on some legality, couldn't condemn him.
Here's some surveillance video that you may have seen in the news of one of the suspects in New York at the Lindenwood Diner meeting with the informant. And I don't know if Lindenwood is a reference to Linden, which is the second biggest city in Guyana, where one of the suspects was previously the mayor. But there is a little bit of that. From what I gather, the Muslim community, both in Trinidad and Tobago and of Trinis here, is extremely secular in general. You think that's accurate?
No.
Not accurate?
No.
Well, I think, excuse me, it's secular to the extent that people are not running around identifying people according to their religion. There's a country, there are people in it of different cultures, of blending of cultures, of different religions, and people are not traditionally criticizing each other or assessing each other or identifying each other in accordance with their religious philosophy, their belief system.
Let's talk about the Trinidad. Oh, and we'll show one more little clip here. This is the perp walk of the individual involved. I guess this is
in Trinidad.
Mr. DeFreitas, or I think that's in New York, right?
No, I think that was in Trinidad.
That was in Trinidad.
Oh,
it didn't look like it.
though. I saw an NYPD shirt.
Yeah, well, they could have been down there. They could have been. Oh, Yankee hats are everywhere, though, right?
No,
we also saw the Yankee
I saw
hat.
the blue, the light blue, summer NYPD.
Let's talk about the Trinidadian population in New York. Do you know roughly how many people are here?
Well, I could go from the statistics, the census statistics, and from the health department, I know there's 83,000, and that's data from 2000. So 83,000 in the 5 boroughs. I'm not sure outside, and I'm sure there are places like Hampstead. Wherever you find a carnival, you know there's a big Caribbean community there. So there was, up till last year, no, 2 years ago, a carnival in Hampstead. So if you're going on 84,000 in the 5 boroughs, statistics of 2000, I'm sure it's a lot more if you added Yonkers and Westchester, and he's from Westchester, so there's pretty much other boroughs.
Is there a community? Is there like a little Port of Spain, you know, like Chinatown, anywhere in the tri-state area?
I don't think there's a little Port of Spain, and the reason for that is that folks from the English-speaking Caribbean tend to gather in various communities. So you'll find Jamaicans, you'll find Vincentians, you'll find Trinidadians. You'll find in Queens, for example, in one of the largest black middle-class communities on planet Earth, that whole region that includes St. Albans, Cambria Heights, Laurelton, you have a huge Caribbean population there. Cambria Heights in particular has a large Haitian population. But there's no little Port of Spain. There's no one particular area that has just Trinidadians. If you walk along Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, you can get most of the things that you can get in Port of Spain, but you can also get the things you get in Jamaica or some of the other islands as well.
So in the immigrant context, there's a lot of mixing, and it becomes a Caribbean thing.
That's correct.
Rather than a national thing.
That's right.
Let's take a phone call. Patricia in Brooklyn. Hi, you're on the air, Patricia.
Yes, hello.
Thanks for calling.
Yes. Hi, how are you, Mr. Lehrer?
Good. Turn your television off because you're getting a little bit of a delay. Okay, and then come right back and tell us whatever you want to tell us.
Yes, I'm very happy to know that you're covering things at the island that I was born, which is Trinidad. And I want to say hello to Mr. Robinson's cousin and the young lady that is with you.
Greetings.
Anything else you want to say?
Yes, I'm very surprised of what I'm hearing about Trinidad. Because, as you know, we are party people there, you know, and...
Party people,
yes.
not radical political people.
Yeah, and something, you know, something that like, what's happening around the world, it saddens many of us about, and we wouldn't like to know, like in Trinidad, that's something like the Al-Qaeda and stuff like that, and so on. But before Mr. Abu Bakr, we'll go back a little to let you know that when Dr. Equilium was the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, it was tried to take over before.
1970.
They tried to take over the island before, but it was not no Muslims. It was Mr. Robinson and friends.
All that you're talking about.
That was a Black Power revolution. That was not a Muslim coup.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patricia. Do you think her reaction is typical of people in the community here to these revelations over the last few days, or these allegations?
Yes.
People are shocked that this would come from out of that community?
I don't know that they're shocked that it's coming out of a community. I think they never identified that Muslims could be living in New York, be part of any plot to destroy something in America, because I think the people that are living here are part of America, and they don't see us as separate from America. So if some community, whether it's our own community, hurt us, they're hurting us too.
In general, Trinidad and Tobago is not in the news, and the reason is that it's generally a non-aligned country, very intelligent people, very ready to debate, but not generally in the news because there's generally no difficulty, no conflict that's of international interest, except when the coup happened, the attempted coup in 1990. So there are many people I've spoken with in the last week. I was in Trinidad up until a week ago Friday, and coming back to this, this happened just as I was coming back. There are many people who are shocked and who are saddened because they feel as though their beautiful place to live is now in the world's eye in a very negative light. And people here feel the same way. So it's, I would say that many people are shocked. There's a state of shock to some extent. That's the way some people have described it to me. But they will get over it because they keep things in perspective also. They understand that, number one, as I said earlier, this particular group that's in Trinidad was approached for support for a plot that they did not initiate, and they rejected offering any support.
Do you anticipate, are you seeing yet any kind of backlash or discrimination or profiling of people in this community now that didn't exist before?
I would imagine not. I think this will pass. I know that the intelligence community, of course, the Homeland Security community, will have, now that their antennae are raised, will not lose sight of what's going on. There'll be more scrutiny paid to international travel and so on, and that's to be understood.
Disagree? Agree?
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sarah in Richmond on Staten Island, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
Oh, hi. How are you? I really enjoy your show, and I think it's a good show. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, what I have to say about what happened in connection with the JFK plot in Trinidad is that it's very shocking. However, I mean, it's just that people are just making stuff up now. Why don't you investigate? Whatever the media comes up with, oh, they're Muslims trying to kill people, and then talk about your own government. What are you doing overseas? Not just Iraq. Forget about Iraq. I'm from Africa, okay? Your government, your ambassadors, they're giving arms to rebels to fight civil wars. What about that? Pfizer giving bad medications to kids in Nigeria. What about that? Why don't you prosecute them? You know, I mean, stop this everything. I'm not saying you're innocent. I'm not saying they're guilty. I believe in justice, and I believe everyone has to be investigated, period. And I don't take sides. But Americans, wake up, use your brain. I'm not saying they're lying. Don't say they're lying. But ask questions, you know?
Fair enough. All of those stories need to be investigated. I'm sure we all agree with that here.
Indeed. And when something like this happens, first of all, whoever was involved with the planning should have had in somewhere in their mind that they may get caught and be prepared to pay the consequences. Also, we've had the worst, we've had some very serious incidents in this country, which could also be called terrorism. Oklahoma City, the Virginia Tech. Well, these things were not perpetrated by foreigners. These are homegrown. Well, of course, we had the Korean at Virginia Tech. But my point is that you don't automatically isolate that community. Some people do, and they do it sometimes temporarily, but it's not a permanent.
Right. There is a slightly different thing, though. I mean, not that Oklahoma City was fictitious or anything like that. Obviously, it happened. There are radical right-wingers out there planning this or that. But there is kind of a worldwide Islamist movement to harm Americans in the United States. And, without going into the root causes of it or anything like that, it's a different kind of thing. I mean, we see the Madrid bombing, the London bombings, yeah. Not just Americans, but the West. There's Al-Qaeda per se. There are these homegrown in various places groups who are inspired by Al-Qaeda, whatever. I mean, this is a bigger thing than right-wing militias right now, right?
Well, everyone's using the term jihad. Historically, we know what the term means. People are using the term. I see, one of the shocking things, the case of the attempt or the plan to destroy the lives of some of the soldiers at Fort Dix, all of a sudden there's a big press conference, and the police and everyone else involved are standing there almost in a state of 15 minutes of glory, unraveling how they trapped this person because of the chap at the store who had to convert the media. Why do that? Why do that? Why not stop the event and close your mouth and go back to your office? And if that, now you know of one of the ways in which you can catch people. Why broadcast to the planet that this is one of the ways you can catch people?
Okay,
Because
so
the
let me play devil's advocate. Why not broadcast it and say to the world, our investigators are good, you're not necessarily going to get away with this if you're involved in hatching such a plot, and keep your eyes and ears open, regular citizens in the course of your life, like this guy in the digital Photoshop, whatever he was, happened to do.
We're not at odds. My point is, the person in the digital Photoshop does not have to become a hero, except in the minds of those who are the investigators, for whom he has helped to foil the plot. There's no need to stage this, because once you put that all over the planet, then the person who was next going to go to one of those places to get the media converted is going to find another way to do it.
Let's take another call. Elizabeth in St. George. Hi, you're on the air.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth. I'm calling to say I really like the show, but I really agree with the caller that called. I think her name was Sarah or so. You know, all these things are very sad to hear. People, you know, trying to kill people. That's very sad. But however, I believe in a permanent solution, which is look at the root cause. Why are they doing this? Is it because they hate Americans because of their freedom? Is that so? Why are they doing this? Ask the question, what do you do overseas that impacts people's lives that they want to kill you? You know? Ask yourself that question. It's very sad. I don't want to hear it no more. You know, it's very sad.
Fair enough, and I hope and I think that on this show and other things that I'm involved with and this station is involved with, that we're looking at what the United States is doing around the world and American corporations doing around the world quite critically, or with an unjaundiced, with an appropriately jaundiced eye and not rose-colored glasses. So we take your point.
Something I should bring up here is you know, June is Caribbean Month. It was approved last year in Congress and in the Senate. And it's kind of timely that this arrest happened on June 1st, the beginning of Caribbean Month. What is on the agenda for this month? I think there's a big seminar that's happening in Washington, and all the heads of government should be there for a summit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this summit.
Not.
Okay, so I think it's timely that this has happened now, when the heads of government in the Caribbean is going to have an audience with the president, and perhaps they should now seek to work out some kind of assistance for the Caribbean to help the Caribbean secure its borders, because with all the news about Al-Qaeda and people, you know, shoring up and safing up the rest of the world, it means there's little unmanned borders and unprotected areas like the Caribbean for people who have evil intent to go and try to do stuff.
And of course, the purpose of this show, which I think the viewers get, is to talk about Trinidad and Tobago and the Trinidadian and Tobagonian community in New York in much larger context than that. So it's not all just Trinidad terror when that's such a tiny thing. Let's take one more phone call. Brandon in Queens. Hi, Brandon, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you doing, Brian?
Hi.
This is basically what I want to say. First of all, I was surprised by what I heard when I woke up on Sunday. Actually, I was participating in a soccer game when the first coup took part in 1990, but it was actually flying right over my head when this was happening. Nevertheless, what I would like to say is that Trinidad and Tobago is a really special place. Not just Trinidad and Tobago, but the Caribbean in general. I think the people of the West Indies are its greatest resource. And I think untapped, it's a resource that's going to waste. And as a result, it's becoming a haven for all these other disgruntled people to come in on, as we would say, the Caribbean, mud over waters.
When you say the people are a resource that's going to waste, what do you mean?
Yeah, I forgot the guy's name, but the Caribbean is a people that's full of education. We're one of the highly educated people in the world, but opportunity is very limited.
Thank you. And yet, Trinidad and Tobago, one of the most prosperous countries in the Caribbean, correct?
Without a doubt. Because of the oil, the natural gas, the things that Hazra was mentioning earlier. The Yellow Pages of Trinidad and Tobago is pretty much the largest in the region. There's a lot of business, a lot of natural resources that are being used.
Let's finish up with a couple of more fun aspects of Trini culture. Among the things Trinidad is known for is its version of Carnival. Here is some video of Carnival Trinidad style. Enough visual information here to locate this. I don't know if this is, it doesn't look like New York. That looks more like islands architecture.
No, that's downtown Port of Spain. That's passing the reviewing stand. That's in downtown Port of Spain. There may have been some earlier footage at what was the Queen's Park Savannah, which is one of the main venues. I've been at Carnival for the last 31 years straight, and I'm in costume every year, and it is a major part of my year because after working diligently up here for the year and being in the cold, it's great to get down there in February and participate in Carnival, but I also go other times of the year as well, 2 or 3, 4 times a year.
I bet it is great. Okay, so let's bring it back here, and we want to show some props that you brought, Hazra, along the musical lines.
Well, my prop is, you're calling it my prop, but this is a tenor pan and a bass pan.
I don't know if we can get a close-up of this. These are from a steel drum.
These are
set.
miniature steel drums, and
the steel drum, which is the instrument of Trinidad and Tobago, which is the national instrument.
I know he was dying to do this.
Well, I wasn't dying to do it, but I'm ready to do it at any time. It is the only musical instrument invented in the 20th century. It was developed in Trinidad and Tobago in 1939, basically from the discarded 55-gallon oil drums of the United States Navy, as they were.
Interesting.
And
the Navy, there was a big U.S. military presence during World War II, right?
That's correct. And that's how all of this evolved. By the time the war was over, they had not only used these just for rhythm, but discovered that at a certain point you can get certain notes out of it, and there became the pan tuner in Trinidad and Tobago. That is the person who actually tunes the little groove areas that give you different musical notes, is able to, using 6 different skirt lengths on these 55-gallon oil drums, represent every note that's on an 88-key piano.
And just, can I plug,
yes?
Just so you know, at Lincoln Center this year, because it's Caribbean Month, there will be a Pan Jazz Festival at Lincoln Center, put on by a group from Trinidad and Tobago. It's at the Time Warner Building, June 16th. So it's part of Caribbean Month, and it's been going on for 3 years, where you get classical music and jazz coming out of this instrument, not just the soca and reggae that people are accustomed to hearing.
And you've got one more thing here.
That's a little surprise. That's a little surprise thing. I've gone to Africa, Europe, Middle East, and found this little item in the bar. It's Angostura bitters. It's a product that's made in Trinidad, unique to Trinidad, and I don't know how it's found its way all over the world.
It is all over the world. So any bar you go to, it's also used to flavor foods as well as to flavor drinks.
That's after you've had enough of your favorite drinks,
works
right?
as an after too much also.
Well, Trinidad has also given the world soca music, so thank you both very much for joining us and explaining a lot more about Trinidadian communities in New York and Trinidadian culture in Trinidad than probably a lot of viewers knew before. And let's go out on some soca music. That was not soca music, that was steel pan music, as some of you know. And coming up in a minute is Immigration to New York, bad for African Americans. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Mom! Mom!
What?
You can't find Ichabod.
What?
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who would love to put up with you.
Hi, I'm Matthew Goldstein, the Chancellor of the City University of New York. Look who's teaching at CUNY. Michio Kaku, string field theorist and international authority on theoretical physics. John Corigliano, Academy Award and Pulitzer Prize winner in music. David Nassau, winner, Bancroft Prize for Best Biography. Jill Barganetti, Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. Gregory Rabassa, recipient the National Medal of Arts in 2006 from President Bush. Elizabeth Nunez, winner, American Book Award. Godfrey Gumbs, American Physical Society Fellow and member, New York Academy of Sciences. World-class talent, award-winning scholars, CUNY is their classroom, CUNY is your university.
This is Brian Lehrer Live. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. You can also sign up for our free podcast at CUNY.TV. So is immigration to New York bad for African Americans? As Congress debates the immigration bill, that's one of the questions, especially as it relates to low-skill workers, the kind who tend to be illegal in our city, that has only about half of black men employed, and most of those struggling being the ones without much education. With me to talk about this question, Leon Winter, author of the book American Skin, co-author now with Congressman Charles Rangel of Rangel's new autobiography called And I Haven't Had a Bad Day Since, and Leon is a blogger at The American Race, and Juana Ponce de Leon, executive director of the Independent Press Association. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much for coming on. Leon, the immigration debate is often presented as sort of white nativists versus people of color who want to come here to work and make a life. Left out of that conversation is African Americans. Should they be?
I do think they should be included, and yet in a way that doesn't end up being an either-or kind of discussion, because in fact it should be both should be able to be done. But certainly to think that there's a train moving right now about immigration reform, it ought to also be broadened, I think, to really examine poverty as much as anything else, of which immigration reform is a part.
Do you believe that immigration to New York exacerbates African American unemployment here?
Not directly, but at the same time, it removes a lot of the pressure to address some of the, let's say, if you want to call it inequities, or basically to address the problem. And I think it also tends to convey an implicit moral, or to place immigrants on an implicit moral higher ground in the case. If you look at this as a competition, right, a Darwinian kind of competition, well, we have the virtuous, hardworking immigrants who have the right values. You know, we feel sorry for them to some extent, but we also recognize, especially in New York, how much we depend on them. And then we look at unemployed African Americans, and we don't necessarily look that hard, but we make an assumption. They just don't have what it takes compared to immigrants, and we don't go much past that. And that is a problem.
Juana, employers certainly seem to make that distinction. There are studies that show that, you know, even when given a choice between a Caribbean or African black immigrant and an African American similarly qualified for the same job, in studies that have been done, and kind of undercover studies, the employers will almost always choose the black immigrants over the black Americans. So there's something there, at least in perception, right?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, before coming to the show, I trolled through
the the Caribbean and African American and Black newspapers that I get to see at the Independent Press Association as we scan through for stories about what's going on, and definitely, I mean, there just recently there was an article that came out, an editorial that came out saying we should learn from our immigrant brethren. And in a Black African newspaper saying, they come, they, look how quickly they are gaining, economic status and so on. So what is it with us that, why are we kind of being left out of the loop? Where is that legacy coming from that we consider ourselves less?
That's a self-critical work ethic kind of editorial.
Yes.
But on the other hand, some of it, what I was referring to, were studies that show discrimination when there are job applicants for the same jobs. So in the real world, do you think that there just is competition, and that when we talk about immigrants taking jobs from native-born Americans, that African Americans are in fact on the ground in the real world suffering from the degree of immigration to New York City?
I think that there are studies that show that unemployment unemployment is pretty even in states where there is a high immigrant population and in states where there isn't. So that would kind
Black
of indicate,
unemployment.
yes, that would indicate that perhaps the immigrant workforce is not necessarily responsible for Black unemployment.
That's an interesting stat, Leon, and I've heard that before. So if you look at New York, which is such an immigrant city, there's a certain African-American unemployment rate. If you look at some other American cities which are not nearly as immigrant, you see in many cases a similar African-American unemployment rate. This is what the immigration advocates use to say, it's not about us.
Well, yes and no. The fact is, the states, or more specifically the cities, African Americans tend to be concentrated in relatively large cities in this country. If you start from New York, or at least the New York metro area, and Chicago, Atlanta, and a few other cities, Houston, for example, you have a large percentage of African Americans, and at the same time, all of those cities have very large immigrant But to be sure, the studies do show, in general, that immigrants are tending not to take jobs from Native Americans, Black or otherwise. But I think at the margins, that tendency of preference, just go around New York now. New York is booming. We've seen all these stories about this. And one of the main reasons booming is in construction. I always make a point of looking at construction crews wherever I walk around. And what do you see? You see handfuls of at least people who would appear to be African Americans. You can't tell for sure until they open their mouths in some cases. But more often than not, you see large numbers, especially of Latinos. And I have seen stories about this in general in this country, actually. Mexican Americans who have finally made it to New York in large numbers are really, they are in the hallowed tradition of many immigrant groups, they are carving a place for themselves out in that industry. Nothing wrong with it. But if you talk to African Americans, for example, in this city who have struggled for long times trying to get into union jobs that once only Italian Americans or the white Americans could have, and almost just as they were starting to crack that open, that's when this latest immigrant wave really hit, and I think it does hurt them.
We have time for a few phone calls if people want to weigh in real quick on this question of whether immigration affects the employment fortunes of African Americans in this city. 212-251-0801. And if so, what do we do about it? 212-251-0801. Also on the history, Juana, Leon was just talking about some of it. This is from an essay that comes from a white-dominated restrictionist group, anti-immigration group called FAIR. But here's some of the history as they recount it in an op-ed. It says, as immigration slowed around 1920, the movement of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North gained momentum, and the nucleus of a black middle class was formed. During the labor crunch caused by World War II and the post-war recovery of the 1950s and 60s, when immigration was about 1/5 its current levels, black Americans made enormous economic and social advances. And then it goes on to say came the current wave and then down again. If you accept some of this history, what do we do about it? How do we balance the rights of immigrants that we want to uphold and the unbelievable legacy of slavery and official discrimination and unofficial discrimination against African Americans, which should probably be the country's first order of business to set right?
Well, I think that the framing, that keeps on coming up with this issue of are immigrants taking work away, are they displacing, African Americans, I have here, it's interesting, I have here an editorial from the Daily Challenge that is a
black newspaper.
Yeah, black newspaper that says, when is the March for Black Folks? And in the middle of this editorial, James Klingman says, if people who are in this country illegally can do it and make such an impact, what do you think the impact would be for black people supposedly made illegal by default if they were to have a march, right? And then he said, don't get caught. He then says, don't get caught in the, that it's us against them. Our real enemy really is a white-dominated economic system that has disfavored, the African American.
The enemy is racism.
So exactly.
Right.
So the framing, I think it's a little tricky to say, well, what do we do about this? It's very real.
But there's another aspect of the framing that I think is implicit in that is important, and that is, from the point of view of that editorialist, that this is a racialized conflict. Remember, we're not debating immigration reform, even though the subtext has to do with Hispanics especially. But we're talking about immigration on the terms of these are people who have come from other countries who are working hard and doing these things. Nobody's looking at, officially it's not being discussed as something about one ethnic group or the other. But because of the racialization of the African American plight in this country, there is that view. So immigration reform becomes seen as something that's being done for them, and therefore something should be done for us too. And I think it is unfortunate because, again, I just came from a great conference in Washington that was discussing putting poverty in general square in the center of the 2008 presidential debate. And among their major points are immigration reform, for all the reasons of the impact that it has on poverty, as well as health care for children, as well as what we would see as racial justice overall in terms of discrimination and these kinds of issues. There is no reason why we can't do both. But unfortunately, in certain places, you're absolutely right. The framing tends to become a question of, well, every group getting theirs, as opposed to making America work in general as it should.
So what kind of a policy might start to get at that?
I think a coordinated poverty-centered approach, poverty and justice-centered approach, one that says there are different issues if you're an immigrant versus if you are here, native born. But in other words, we're reforming immigration not because necessarily that immigration needs to be reformed, but because there are people in our country who need this particular form of relief and help. And so we should be doing all these things at the same time. For example, specifically, job training. Specifically, programs that address the needs of the ex-incarcerated. A very, very important factor, especially for the high black male unemployment rate. These issues should be paired with it. Whereas, to the extent that the political will is only focusing on one thing at a time, it does have sort of an unfortunate effect of kind of dividing and conquering, or at least forcing politicians to choose one thing at a time. So you have the specter of most mainstream black politicians are supporting immigration reform to the resentment of some segments of the black community.
Why would that be? Why would the politicians be out of touch with their own constituents?
Well, it's not so much that they're out of touch, I think, but politicians have to make calculations. Politicians have to deal with the specific legislation that's in front of them at the time and decide, first of all, is this good or not good? I mean, just on their own feelings alone, they can see this genuinely. But I guess their calculation is, you know, you think about the immigration thing. Anyone who cares about this can see what immigrants are bringing to the table. It's visible. There's a certain its time has come thing. But you don't really see exactly what the unemployed black, 22-year-old out there is actually bringing to the table. There is literally no bill for them to act on like that now.
It doesn't at the surface level tug at the power structure's heartstrings in the same way, or the majority's heartstrings.
And so if you're a black elected official, you have this thing in front of you now. You have to make that choice.
We're going to run out of time in a minute, but I want you to get a nice plug in here for the Independent Press Association. I think what you do is an amazing thing, which is you keep tabs, and I'm on your mailing list, so I get to see some of the stuff on all kinds of ethnic and community newspapers in New York.
That is correct. The Independent Press Association is a nonprofit, and it was set up to work with the media sector that services immigrant and low-income communities, basically because they're not served by mainstream. So we have a battery of programs, but the most visible and the one that you see is that every single week we get pitches from the communities of articles that they think are important to the communities. We translate them and send them out.
And so to tie our two segments from tonight together, when the Trinidadian and Guyanese connection to that JFK case came out over the weekend, yours was one of the first places I turned to make sure that I was going to find some community voices and not just law enforcement voices and official voices. So thank you for your work. Thank you for coming on tonight. And
Thank
ditto
you.
to you, Leon.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And that's it for tonight's show. We are here live Wednesday nights at 7:30. You can sign up for our free podcast at CUNY.TV. Next week, more of our Earth to New York series with the Dominican Republic to New York. The DR could lose out big time under the proposed immigration bill. And please tune into my daily radio show, The Brian Lehrer Show, weekday mornings at 10 on WNYC. Tomorrow morning, can the enforcement provisions of the immigration bill really work? That's at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning on 93.9 FM and 820 AM WNYC. Have a great night.